Disclaimer. The hosts of this podcast, Timothy Patrick and Will Foley, are by no means medical professionals. However, having lived experience with mental illness themselves, they have gained useful perspectives on common mental health issues that some of us struggle to overcome on a daily basis. By sharing their stories, they hope to create connection. By creating connection, they hope to help you find your purpose. And through purpose, we can all begin to build the foundation for positive mental health. This is Above Ground Podcast.
Are you ready to lace up your boots, throw up your horns, and jump into the pit? Then let's stomp the stigmas of mental illness. It's time for Above Ground Podcast. Now, Will Foley and Timothy Patrick.
First, I wanted to talk to you about our good friends, Dan and Natalie at Close Knit Company. That's right. It's May. You know what May means? It's t-shirt weather. That's right. T-shirt weather. They got all sorts of cool designs to strap you in, man. So go check them out at closeknitco.com. Make sure you tell them you heard it here on Above Ground Podcast. And while you're over there checking out their awesome designs for the summertime and checking out some tequila t-shirts, because they got lots of them floating around, I see. You can check out Collabex and pick yourself up an Above Ground Podcast t-shirt or hoodie, because that's how we keep this show rolling, people. T-shirts. And we all love t-shirts. Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to Above Ground Podcast. Above Ground Podcast.
Because you can't serve below.
You know who that is. You down with TPP?
Yeah, you know me.
What's up, Timmy? How we doing this week, buddy?
We're doing a little overwhelmed, little irritable, but
Me too.
one foot in front of the other, brother.
I hear you, man. Yeah, I'm a little bit irritable too, man. A lot of stuff going on. Just it's been one hell of a year, and needless to say, and just the last 4 months has been insane too. So
Yeah.
it is what it is. But we are on Zoom, which means we are here for another interview. And I'm very happy to have our guest this morning. Our guest this morning is Jaime Fabroa. Jaime, how are you?
I am doing well, and that's not the well, and I'm putting quotation marks up in the air. It is actually doing well, because every now and then we hear I'm doing well as a formality, as a usual thing to say, an expected thing to say, but I genuinely can say I'm doing well.
That's awesome.
Perfect. That's what we like
awesome
to hear.
Yeah.
And you actually saved Will from that spiel, because he would have asked you, how are you really doing? Because
I did some research as well, guys. I knew that was something that you would tap into. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to throw something in there, throw a wrench in the gears, and make sure I get it out there.
Excellent.
I've done a little homework. As much as I could find. I listened to your podcast with your cousin, Dr. Raj. I did not listen to the second part. I did listen to the first part. Okay. And then I heard, I'm interested in, I loved how you came at it with the facts versus myths thing. So we're going to get into that. But
awesome.
But why don't you tell our listeners who you are and a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into a real conversation.
Okay, great. So I'm Jaime Fabroa from Toronto, Canada. So you might hear a little bit of accent. People say I do have a little something when I say about or something like that.
Yes.
I mean, hey, I don't notice it. If you do, if it bothers you, let me just get that out of the way, right? Mm-hmm. So I speak of suicide awareness and prevention, and not from a scientific background or anything like that, but through experience. And that is through my father taking his life back in 2010. This was 4 days before my 25th birthday. And soon after that, I experienced my own suicidal ideation and thoughts, and actually had attempts. And that really took a toll on my family, myself, and it changed everything, as one could imagine. And it really took me to the place where I was at my lowest low. And from there is when I really got the courage to understand that my father did what he did, and it had nothing to do with me. And I didn't carry any more guilt or resentment or anger. And I just woke up knowing that if my father left this world and gave me my purpose in life, which was to share this and share what I've been through to create awareness, then that is the biggest gift that I could ever receive from him, because it now gave me a reason to truly live and live for others, in the service of others, to make sure that I share that so that others can break the stigma of what it's like to speak about suicide, even about suicide and your feelings towards it, your ideas about it, even in action could prevent such a thing. So that's where I stand now. And, the classic question that people have asked others, who are you, or tell me about yourself. People tend to go to their resume and say, I was this and I was a banker and I was that. But I tend to go to, well, now more than ever, that I am a stand for suicide awareness and prevention. That is exactly who I am. And I know that, and standing with 2 feet, standing tall about it, right? So that's who I am.
That's awesome. And we are so, so proud and grateful to have you on. Real quick, that whole line when you had said, that was the greatest gift that he had given you, that just gave me chills. Like that perception is just phenomenal. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It took a while to get here, but I could say
Sure.
it now, and it's like my heart palpitates with joy, because it's truly a gift. It truly is. Yeah.
How old was your father?
49. So young.
Wow, I'm going to be 49 in a couple weeks.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's and Tim and I have both had our own experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of come at this whole thing from that suicidal ideation perspective.
Right. Yeah.
And I after I got through my own personal crisis, that's how I kind of found, even though mental illness has been part of my entire life, like my entire life has been affected by it, because my mother has been sick since I was a small child. So so it's not like it wasn't anything that I didn't know about. It was just something that I just didn't want to deal with. But I will say this, that my thoughts, my opinions about suicide itself have changed since my 20s. And it's kind of weird how when you're young, you think, oh, I'd never do such a thing, or, it can never get that bad. And I think a lot of people don't understand it doesn't become an option until it becomes an option. And that's a really, like, and even the staunchest of people who say, oh my God, it's not, that's never an option. Well, it is when it becomes an option to you.
100%. And I guess a lot of people who have not even gone down that road for the thought of suicide, like you said, that Will, about you having a view of suicide in your 20s versus now in your 40s, looking back at your 20-year-old self, I don't know if you can relate fully, but even when I look back on it, I thought of it as, why would someone do that? Why would it be so bad, like you said, that they want to take their life? And it's stupid. It's ridiculous. Like, you throw out all these judgments that are in a negative context, and then you get there. And And then, like you said, it is an option, and then it becomes a forefront option, and then it becomes the only option, and you can't get out of it. And you can't get out of it because the only thing you think about is the option of ending your life because you think that that is the only place to go to turn to because of what you've dealt with. And then all of a sudden your thoughts flutter and come back to, well, I thought that was a stupid idea. And then it goes back to, well, I'm not going to tell anyone, because if I thought it was stupid back then, and I'm thinking that I want to take my life, and I'm thinking this way now, well, why should I tell anyone? Because everyone else will think I'm stupid. Everyone else will think it's dumb. So I think it's important that even sharing that, like what you just shared, Will, was great, because you said that your mother and how that affected you and your day-to-day and growing up and mental illness being in the forefront and what that paved for you. And you didn't know you would get to where you got, but also at the same time, you started talking about it. And that broke the curse. I want to say curse loosely because people speak about generational curses and how that flows into your, your mother was this way, your mother's mother was this way, and so on and so forth, right? But it only takes one
That's right.
of that generation, and it's speaking about it.
Yeah, and that's kind of where that attitude came from, actually. It kind of, the insight kind of came to me like during my crisis in 13, where when I was able to pull myself far enough from it a year or two down the road, I was in like 2015 is when I started to figure out like where I was going to take all this to, because 2015 I wasn't even thinking about like AFSP. I wasn't thinking about like what I was going to do with it. I just knew that because, and this is kind of where Tim and I kind of came together again, because Tim and I have been friends for a long time, but we hadn't really spoken in a few years and stuff. And we ran into each other in a Whole Foods, and we kind of, we didn't know what either one of us was going to say to one another. And we ran into each other into the aisle, literally almost run into each other in the aisle. And we had some conversations, and I had already, I had known a part of Tim's past because I had been involved in it. And when we finally came together and started to put the idea of this podcast together, that you get far enough removed from a situation and you realize, and I look at it this way, that I have a mandate put on my birth certificate now that I have to help someone. And it doesn't matter if it's one person or whatever, as long as my words find somebody's ears that may change mind. And that's really where all this kind of stems from.
Yeah. Which is great, because you're being self-expressed, both of you, in doing this and sharing this, and you're giving a space for others to be self-expressed through your podcasts, which is great because it creates a ripple effect, and having other people talk, and even the listeners that you have, there may be a point in time where they've been dealing with something that they're not able to share at the moment, and then through your podcasts you're doing that, like you're doing that, and you're helping so many people. So I commend both of you. I remember reaching out to you both because I saw what you were up to, and it's great because I haven't seen men that are fully being self-expressed while having others share a platform for them to be self-expressed about mental illness. I haven't seen it yet. So I commend you both for that, because it's truly, truly something that touches my heart, because I know that if, for example, my father heard such a thing, would it be different? I'm not dwelling on it, but it's more so like, if my father was able to have that resource, what other male over the ages of 30 plus, which, by the way, I want to add in there, is the number one leading in suicide. I want to make sure that that's said. I know that that's something to bring up later on even, but it is the number one group of people that take their life. It's males over the age of 40. So I was just so elated when I saw that was there, that's available. And I reached out right away because I knew I wanted to get involved somehow, because you are truly making a great impact on a demographic that isn't really reached out to. So I really, really am really happy that this is now coming and we're together on this and speaking about it, but also you guys have found this in both of you and sharing that, and you're continuing on. So I think it's just amazing.
Thank you so much for the kind words, for sure. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
You have a lifelong invitation to come on whenever you want.
That's awesome. I would love that. And probably to come out to Albany too. I think that would be great.
Yeah, well, I got to get to Toronto. I'm a hockey fan. I've never been to the hockey. I've never been to the Hockey Hall of Fame. So.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll go take a trip down there.
Let me ask you a question quick. Actually, the two kind of questions in one. But the first part, did you ever experience any, I guess we'll call them symptoms, before the tragic incident with your father? And did your father have, outward, was there any kind of conversations about, his life, his symptoms, beforehand?
So, my father was born with rheumatoid arthritis. So arthritis within the whole body. My father had even arthritis in the eyes. And he was just waking up every day with pain. And I knew him to be in his 30s, in a wheelchair, crutches sometimes, not being able to get out of bed. And I remember him sharing with me that he knew he had something wrong with his body when he was about 10 years old. He couldn't move his feet. His joints were just swollen. So as far as he knew, he was born with it. Now that physical pain transpired somehow emotionally, like we spoke about before, where there is a correlation between emotional manifesting to physical. His was physical manifesting to emotional. Now, I can't diagnose it, nor has anyone diagnosed him with mental illness. But just like all of us can imagine, if you wake up every day with pain, excruciating pain, what does that do to your mental health? And I remember even there are times where he would have conversations with my mother when I'd be around about how he was better off if he wasn't around. And that was the language. And I, as a young child, didn't know what that meant even. I thought it was just him leaving, like physically leaving the house, or physically leaving the marriage with my mother. But it was more than that, and I didn't know. And there was also an incident where my father would crawl into bed with me at night and just cry. And I had no idea why he would be crying. And he would tell me that his pain was so unbearable and ask me to ask my mother if she could leave him. Now, I didn't know it at the time. I thought, what the heck are you talking about? But it was my father's sign or symptom of, I want to end this. So I want her to leave me so that I don't have to deal with this, burden of the responsibility of taking care of my wife and my two daughters. And I think that if we speak on a bit about how a man should be, and I say that with quotations, right? My father's upbringing was very born into a world of, you're a breadwinner as a man, you bring home money, your wife is at home and she's able to do the household chores, cook, clean, take care of the kids. And it is an equal relationship. And I think for my father, he just felt less of a man because he wasn't able to physically perform well at work. He was a mechanic. He was studying to be an electrician. He was doing all these things. And physically, he wasn't able to keep up. So that took a toll. And that, I would say, was a symptom, because it was a symptom of showing that he followed these stigmas and stereotypes, and none of it is his fault. He was just born into it. And then that led him to obviously take his life. But there was these signs that I, as a child, didn't know of. Like, I mean, as a young girl, I didn't know that that's how, quote unquote, a man should be like, right? So when we talk about stigma, and I know that stigma is a big thing for both of you to break barriers and break walls about that, which I think is great. But that is one of those things that my father felt trapped into. And I can't relate as a female, but I could relate in the sense of, well, that's what my father thought he should have been like. And because it was a debilitating illness for him, he couldn't live up to that. So therefore, he felt like he wasn't worthy of living because it wasn't something he could live up to at all. But the truth is, no man can live up to that, because it is a crazy stereotypical things that we've said and set up for man. Like even in our language, when we say man up, what does that even mean? What does that mean? You know,
I'm not sure yet. Because it's funny because I like, and I deal with this myself, because you get doubtful of yourself and everything else. So when you think about the things that men should do, I can't do most of those. I can't fix most of the things in my house. I'm pretty terrible at that.
Yeah.
I'm good at talking, but that's not generally something that is frowned, is looked upon as a masculine thing.
Yeah.
But I can understand where his feeling of not being able to live up to his own standard, because, and is it really his own standard, or was it a standard that was driven into his mind over the years because of that? Mm-hmm. But even on your own personal self, we can put so many standards on ourselves to try to live up to that, like, you just can't live up to them. And I've been struggling with that myself in the recent months, just because you doubt. It's easy to doubt yourself. I'm very good at calling out the bad qualities of myself. It's hard to see the good qualities sometimes.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's not forget the time, the time that he was a child, that period, growing up in that, era. It was different. It was more of that pressure, like you said, that this is, the standard of a man kind of thing, I would like to think that it's improved, but I don't know. I still see like memes and stuff that is like, if you have a beard and if you and then abs and stuff, but you can't change a tire, you're not a man. I'm like, well, I guess I'm not a man because I don't have any of those things. So I'm far from a man, I guess. It's all right, whatever.
Yeah. I think that's also why that when you asked about if there were any symptoms, one can go to, there were symptoms of depression or symptoms of mental illness. But when you said that, I wanted to make sure that it is a symptom as well to give in to thinking that you stereotypically need to be something that somebody told you to be. And that is a symptom. That
Yes.
100% is a symptom. And that's why I'm glad you posted in that way and questioned it in that way, because truly my father was under the symptom of thinking that there was supposed to be a way that he had to be. And then therefore that created an effect on him mentally.
I gotta say a word. I gotta say a word to Will.
Yeah.
Autonomy. There it is, Will.
Okay.
There it is. There it is.
I'll give you that one for number 2 or 3, but you got to look up. You actually have to look up the definition of autonomy. That's all I'm saying. But it is part of it. That is part of it.
That's
it's
definitely
hard
part
to have
of it, for
autonomy if you don't feel like you can have autonomy.
And pain, and let's not leave out the pain factor, as you said. That is, I don't know the statistics on it, but it's definitely up there. When you live with that kind of pain every day, it's gonna either force you into depression or force you even further, down that hole. So
100%. And then there's also what keeps you going in that is there is treatment, there is new medicine, there's all these things that come up that you're like, okay, I'm willing to try. And that obviously could take a toll as well, because if you're expected to try all these new drugs, take these new things, and they don't work, you're going through the ebbs and flows of it. And it's just that mentally is distressing, right? Where
sure,
there's a whole bunch of medication that wasn't covered by insurance or what have you. And that we were, dishing out money because it was just like, okay, let's try. But it's merely that, trying. And then if it wasn't successful, which it wasn't, I think the last tail end of his medication that he took was in many ways, but was it enough? No, because there was still mental scarring that he had. Right. So, yeah. And I'm glad you said that, because these are symptoms that people don't diagnose as symptoms. And
right. And just going through that process, it's very, like, as you said, just trying things is actually trying on the body. It's creating more stress, more anxiety, which in return is probably, heightening the symptoms. Yeah. So it's like it's a compounded thing,
And I also think that just the pain alone is enough to make anyone start to question whether or not they want to keep going. Yeah. And especially for the pain that he was in. I mean, having rheumatoid arthritis at that, like finding out early on, like that's not a general thing that happens to everyone. So he had a lot of stuff going on before he even was fully developed in the brain enough to understand what was going on. I mean, if he's not feeling if he can't move his feet at 10 years old, what does that do to your brain as you're developing? So it's like, and we forget that a lot of that developing stuff, we kind of put it off because as children, we have to and now I know for me, I had to grow up very, very, very early, just like your dad probably did. Yeah. Because he had all those problems. So you tend to not know how to be an adult, but yet you have to act like one.
Yeah.
You kind in a way. So it really does mess with the developing brain. And that's not scientific. I think that's pretty proof positive as we see a lot of the things that, have happened to children and what happens later on down the road.
Yeah.
That kind of gets us to the next point, because I know that I've listened to your conversation with your cousin. I'll give your cousin a little plug, Dr. Raj. Is that?
Yes.
And he has a podcast, but I listened to, and I just loved, because you kind of got to the very first myth about suicide as we were talking about it. Is this that? Why don't we talk a little bit about the facts versus myths and how you came to this? Because I know you're assist trained and safe talk trained.
Yes.
And the facts versus myths. A lot of people think that, a lot of people have some misconceptions about what's really at play in people's.
Yeah, totally. I think when we had a conversation earlier on in the beginning of this, we spoke about how the ideas of suicide that you had once upon a time at the age of 20, and then versus 20 years later and what you think about suicide. And I think a lot of these facts and myths stay with people from early on. Even nowadays, you could say that there are some people who haven't tapped into it and they still feel a lot of these myths are actually facts, right? So having said that, I'll get into them so that it makes more sense. But one of the biggest things, and we'll play it like we did with my cousin there. So I'll ask the question and I'll have Tim and Will guess whether it's fact or myth. And then you both explain why you guessed so. And then we'll get into the real of it. Okay.
All right.
Woohoo!
I like games. All right.
Game show.
Okay, great. So, talking about suicide can plant the idea in someone's head. Fact. Okay, for myth. Tim and Will, both for myth. Okay, and why?
You want to talk, Will, or
No, go ahead, Timmy.
I think we'll both probably say around the same thing, but it actually, if anything, it helps because it brings that topic forefront, and at some point it can make them comfortable enough to either talk about it or get distracted and have it not be forefront on their mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, it's not something that can be planted. And most people who experience ideation already have the ideation, and nobody planted that ideation. It just happens to be that it just manifests, and I think that you don't know what to do with it. So I think a lot of people are under this misconception that, oh my God, if I ask this person if he's going to hurt himself, he's going to hurt himself. But that's actually, it's the complete opposite way. It's
right.
It's very, and I got to say, I've asked people a couple times straight out, and the looks on people's faces are like, wow, did you sense that? Or did you it's yeah. So no, big myth.
Okay. And you are both correct. Okay. Now, I want to say that most people feeling suicidal want to talk about their feelings. It is just that the opportunity sometimes never arises because there's no comfort, there's no space for that. And just like you said, Will, there are times where you've straight up said and mentioned suicide to someone, and if they felt that way or they thought about that, and some people are taken back because it's not even a word that is out there on the forefront, that it's in our usual vocabulary. So people tend to feel as if, wait, did he just say suicide? And I say that quietly because a lot of people, that's what we go to. We go to, okay, hush, hush about it. Don't say it. Don't talk about it, and that's not, I'm saying in this conversation of the three of us, we all agree that is not something that we want to bring out to the world. We want to speak about it. Like, just like your podcast, it's about the real conversations, right? So if you're not being real with it, how can you expect others to be real with you?
You can't.
Exactly.
You can't.
So if you are the first one to take the step in speaking about suicide, you are taking that and creating that space for another one to step forward and say, yes, I have suicidal thoughts. So that's why it is a myth, because if you don't talk about it, it's not going to be talked about. If you aren't going to ask someone if they're suicidal or not, they will never tell you it unless they, feel like they're able to, because you've also breached that gap. So
I think many, and not to interrupt you, but I think many people are afraid of the answer. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that we don't have education about this. And then, and if you don't have, obviously the three of us are not the norm. so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is our thing, but it's, I think a lot of people are afraid to ask the question because they don't know how to respond, for one thing. But the other one is, oh my gosh, what happens if he does say it? What am I supposed to do? Am I going to be like, is this my fault? Is it like, so it like, it just cycles around. It really does. It's just like this big vicious cycle of, what do? I don't know what to do. And I don't know what I should do, and so on and so forth.
100%. And I agree with you, Will, because had my father told me that he was suicidal, had my father told me that he was going to take his life that day, I wouldn't know what to do. I looking back with the education I have now, I would know. But back then, as a 25-year-old, there's no way whatsoever. I would just probably freeze. And I probably didn't ask the right questions as well before he left, because I didn't know, because I would have been afraid of the answer. And then what am I to do? So the training and the assist and safe talk training that's available actually to everybody. I will get into later on about the measures that one can take if they are faced with someone that does share that they are suicidal. So then that way it does equip you, and it it's information that you're able to take on with you and not be afraid, and like literally help save somebody's life. Because just like CPR training is available, this assist training and suicide awareness training is available. But if it's not one that you're able to take a class on or go ahead and take that training, then there's conversations like this. And that is, like I shared in the beginning, that is who I am and who I stand for. And that's what I'm going to share with you guys today later on. Good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you being here and sharing with us for sure, because by doing so, like you said, if someone hears it and, someone can connect with that story or understand more how they're feeling through your story, I mean, it's a win-win,
100%. Okay.
That's
so
awesome.
Let's go on with the game, shall we?
Yes.
So, fact or myth, a suicidal person will always be at risk.
Fact.
Okay. Why, Will?
I think because once you have those thoughts, I think that there's only so far that you can push those thoughts out. I don't think that they ever fully go away. And I know that there's probably people who would argue that you can fully recover. And I'm not saying that you can't, but to me, recovery is a day-to-day thing. And not every day is going to be the same. And not every day is going to be good. And I think once you have gone to that place, I think that there's always that door to go to that place again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tim?
Ooh, this is kind of a tricky one. Can you read the question one more time for me?
Sure. Fact or myth, a suicidal person will always be at risk.
I don't know if I can give a straight answer. I kind of think that it differs depending on the person. I'll say what I think is it could be a fact, and I think either way we should kind of treat it that way, just to be on the safe side. Like if someone close to you in your circle, in your family or a loved one, whatever it may be, has those ideations and it, like, I'm not saying to tread lightly, but I'm just saying to be a little bit more mindful of it, keep a watchful eye when you can, so to speak. I don't know if that really answers it though. I that one kind of stumps me a little bit, I'll admit it.
Okay, so I guess to help clarify that, it is definitely a fact. And the reason why I say this is because Will kind of hit it on the head there. When you have your first thoughts of suicide and that is a thought process you're used to. There are times down the road that you may find yourself faced with it again because it's something that you thought of and that you knew existed for you. So I'll give you an example for myself. After my father had died, about a year or so, or year or two, I was heavy into drugs and alcohol. And I would get, plastered. And then my language became, we hear about angry drunks. We hear about, funny drunks. We hear about all of that. And I want to take my life drunk. And I would say awful things to people. And then I would back it up with, well, I want to go where my father is, or I want to kill myself, or I would just, to the point, do drugs and alcohol. So I knew I was going to overdose. And then I didn't know that was my process of taking my life, but that's what I was doing. And then when times got really tough, or I was triggered about something, or I was faced with hard situations, the thought came up again, and I wasn't drunk. So it's like if you're used to going down that thought process, like I shared, it is something that doesn't leave you because you know it existed, and you can be comfortable going down that again. So I will share with you that my last suicidal thought was back in October. And that was around my father's 10-year anniversary. And I shared that with my husband, and I shared that with others. But I knew to break that thought process was to share. So I thought I was this person that was the voice of suicide awareness, that I was able to share my story, that it's been 10 years. I'm really, really on this great high. My life is doing well. And then all of a sudden I had that thought again. And it was just triggered because of the 10-year anniversary of my father's death. So it was like, I am still at risk because I can still think that way. I could still go back to those thoughts. So whether one is truly healed from, and I quote unquote healed from those thoughts, is not something that we could really say is 100% true. But I guess that's why, Tim, you were teetering on it, because also you had said one can fully be rehabilitated and know that they may not be able to go down that road again. But how can you really truly know that unless you're faced with a situation where you will or could think that way? So I get what you're saying, Tim, in that, but this is also why there's things like this. There's things like expressing oneself and sharing about the thought. So it just becomes a thought and doesn't become action, right?
Yeah, I think one important thing that you had mentioned in there is kind of how our brains can be huge douchebags, is that they often look for patterns, and they go back to past experiences to kind of look, to like look for answers, I guess you could say, to go, if a new situation arises, it automatically will go back to something similar and say, oh, this is what happened then. So we're going to, which, can be a variable in that for sure.
Yeah. Our brains are pattern making machines, and we're always looking for the pattern, regardless of whether it's good, bad, or indifferent.
Right.
And to speak to your alcohol and drug use, I think in some ways that there's people who do find themselves in addiction patterns as a slow suicide.
Yes.
Often in ways that it's just easier to become and I'm not saying I shouldn't, I want to reword what I was just about to say, because that's not, I think it's as we're pattern making machines, and we have a certain comfort level with things, that I think that part of the addiction process is that in a lot of ways we're really just looking to end our pain. And a lot of people are hoping not to wake up from an overdose, not necessarily that they want to say that I want to die by suicide, but it's a slow way of dying by suicide. Just like maybe a lot of things, overeating, anything that can become addictive, I think could be a slow way to die.
Yes.
For sure.
Without actually acknowledging that you want to die. But I also think that that's a good way to just kind of sweep it to the side too, where it's kind of gives you a chance not to have to express it.
Yeah, 100%.
I want to acknowledge real quick one thing that you did, and I don't think it's talked about enough, is accountability, where you said that you had these thoughts and you actually told your husband, and that's huge. That is like so huge, and just being able to take accountability for that and to sit down and feel comfortable enough and say that is absolutely huge. So definitely, pat yourself on the back for that.
Thank you. I appreciate you acknowledging it too, because there are times where one may feel as if they can't share with their spouse, with their mother, with their father, with their siblings. And those are the closest people around you, right? And some feel like they can't share that. And thankfully enough, my husband was one that was able to, and has always been one that was very honest in his feelings with me. So therefore I mirrored that as well, right? So I was able to be honest and forthright with what I was feeling to a T. So it's also who you're able to share with too, right? Because one can be fully self-expressed, but if you don't feel safe to do so, and that is a huge thing, feeling safe to do so, that may be a thought that you carry with you for a while, and then all of a sudden we've heard stories where people have taken their life out of nowhere and their spouse has no idea at all why, and wasn't privy to signs even afterwards when they were educated of so, is because there wasn't a safe space. And that's not to discount their spouse. It's more so that wasn't created. And if it wasn't created, then it's no one's fault, but it's more so that's why there's things like your podcast and like people like us who are able to share this so that it creates that space. So I just wanted to piggyback off that, Tim, of what you just said too, because it takes, the standard takes two to tango, right? So there's a lot of what we're doing that creates that space. So all of us should have a pat on the back about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You also have is it Suicide Support and Awareness, the page on Instagram?
Yes. So it's Suicide Survival 365 on Instagram.
Okay.
And that there's strictly of others who share about their suicide experiences, real, like on the real. It's just 30-minute video clips of some of them who just share whatever experience they have gone through and that triggered their suicide ideation, and that whether they took an attempt, and if there was any mental illness background, because a lot of suicide cases, people feel as if they did have mental illness and some of them didn't. So creating awareness about that, and really down to it, making you see that suicide could happen to anybody. And that's really what that page is about, and being that support so others can see that they could maybe see themselves in others who share, which is, I think a lot of people will feel comfortable and then coming about their thoughts and being able to reach out at that point.
Excellent. Good for you.
Thank you.
Actually, it's what you just mentioned, something about it can happen to anyone.
Yeah.
And we've obviously seen a lot of high profile deaths by suicide in recent years. And I was recently in with my wife and my daughter at a Kate Spade store.
Yes.
And I was actually I walked in and I kind of started to look around, and the thought had struck me that if that can happen to her, it can happen to anyone. And we've talked about this a lot. The death of Chris Cornell affected me a lot, as it did a lot of people my age and our age and stuff that, are music people and stuff. But it goes to show that it doesn't matter. It touches everyone. And that's the point. It touches everyone. And I think the 5 degrees of Kevin Bacon, that thing that used to be, I think when it comes to this, I think there's no more than 2 to 3 degrees at this point that somebody doesn't know someone or has someone that's affected.
Yeah.
Right. There is studies similar to that, like that whole 7-degree thing, as one person, if there was a death by suicide, that it kind of shows like the outreach. I don't know if that's a proper word, but, how it affects other people and the percentage that it does, how far it goes, just friends, work, relative kind of thing like that. And
Yeah, 100%.
Jamie, I have to ask you this because we've been speaking about this, and part of the reason why I sought relief from this myself and realized it a couple of years later was because of the fact that if I took my life, there's a greater chance that my daughter will experience these feelings. My question to you is, did you ever have any of those feelings prior to your dad's death? Did you have any depression? Was any of that ever something that happened for you? I'll call it, because you said it was the greatest gift that he gave you, but did you experience any ideation prior to that, or was it pretty, I'm good?
No, I never thought of taking my life, and we shared this earlier on, and my views on suicide prior to my father taking his life were, how could one do that? That's stupid. Life would never get that bad. I even recall a conversation with him that I did share my views on that. And, I beat myself up shortly after I remembered, because I thought maybe he wasn't able to share with me because that's what my views were about suicide. But I put that to bed. But I also realized that my language, my words around it, affected other people and affected any chance of anyone sharing with me even their views on suicide, whether they agree or disagree. It wouldn't matter. It's more so if they had those actual thoughts and were not able to present them because of my judgment. But no, prior to that, I didn't have any thoughts about it at all. And I would get, I guess, angry with my father afterwards, after he took his life, that how could you do this? How could you leave us? How could you, even around the fact that he did it 4 days before my birthday, it was just like a blame game, if that makes sense. It was like pointing fingers at him because of what he did. And that view even changed, because it got to the point where it was like, why am I scorning and blaming my father when that is fully his choice? That was fully what you would be able to do if was his train of thought, and he shouldn't be at all blamed for it. So my views totally changed after that, obviously, because of that degree of separation. It like directly affected me, because I lost my first love towards a man. I lost my best friend. I lost somebody that I looked up to, somebody I even look like, and then all those ideations just went out the window. Right. But I didn't have a thought of suicide prior to that. None at all. And then afterwards, obviously, like we talked about too, it spilled over to me. I guess the generational curse that we speak of, it spilled over to me. And then I became very quiet about my thoughts until I was drunk or high. And then I was able to share it then. But I mean, it was something that I had to break myself. But yeah.
I gotta ask this now. What, if you, I don't know if you, is there things that you do, or basically just from talking to you this time, you seem very in tune with things, very resilient. You're able to understand and kind of move forward. So I guess my question would be, is there things that you can kind of say worked for you, or things that you have used, like tools or whatever it may be, to help you through this process and kind of come out? You almost come out stronger, I will say. And,
there were a lot of things that were laid in front of me after he passed that were the standards, like grief counseling and therapy. And at the time, I rejected them in the ways of, I would go to, for example, my therapy sessions, and it was awful for this, but I would yell at my therapist telling her she didn't know bleep, because I thought, if you actually haven't been through what I've been through, who the heck are you to tell me how I'm going to heal, right? And looking at it now, it's like, oh my God, that's so ridiculous. But obviously, a trained professional, I was saying to her that I knew better, right? Because of my grief of what I was dealing with. So there were ways that I was moving towards help in those conventional ways. But I wasn't allowing it to help me, because at the time I wasn't ready. And so I made every excuse in the book, even yelling at her, to make it not work on me. And then I would seek solace and therapy, quote unquote, in drinking and using drugs, and think that that was the thing. And then I kept on going and kept on going. And then I suppressed my emotions, suppressed speaking about it. I didn't even want anyone to know that my father took his life. I didn't want anyone to pity me. And I kept going on that way. And I realized what I was doing, I was just being like my father and not sharing in that way, not sharing fully self-expressed. And that's when things like bereavement therapy, even courses taking on self-development, in diving into the assist and safe training to learn about suicide. When I was scared shitless, frankly, sorry, but I was scared shitless to do it. But it was like the things that made me come out on this end were the things that made me truly uncomfortable. and I allowed myself to be uncomfortable. And I think that second part of allowing yourself to be uncomfortable is very much key to being in an uncomfortable situation, because I was in an uncomfortable situation when it came to therapy, but I still was pulling out guns and darts and saying, no, 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 no. But I put myself in that situation. But it was allowing myself to really, truly be uncomfortable was when it was like the walls came down, everything came down, and it was like pour into Jamie's cup about all these things that are now going to help her heal, was when that came. So it was like a mixture of detoxing, rehabilitating the way I thought about drugs and drinking, seeking help about that. And then also taking self-development courses, going to therapy, going through group therapy. And I just rapidly did it all one by one and felt uncomfortable throughout the whole time. But that's when I knew, okay, there's an end goal and I don't know what it looks like, but I'm going to do it because I couldn't live like that any longer. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah,
Because,
no, it does
yeah.
above and beyond. It's awesome. I love it. It's taking accountability, educating yourself. I think you have pretty great insight on things, and and you mentioned a little Joseph Campbell in there about going into that scary cave, and that's we talk about this stuff a lot, is getting uncomfortable, because if you stay in that comfy space, that's where unfortunately you're going to stay. You're going to no growth. There's no growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you answered it perfectly. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good.
Awesome.
Wow.
That was heavy. I do have to ask you this. Are you sober?
So,
or did you just have to change your whole relationship with everything and just sort of accept, well, hey, it's just, I can't do it for this reason, or I can't do it for that reason. It's gotta be,
Well, what I discovered was, the answer is no, I'm not sober.
Okay.
And what the extent of that looks like is I don't do drugs, but I do drink. I would say the last drink I had was maybe 3 months ago. Like that, because I that's why I say I'm not sober, because I will drink, but I will not drink into the excess that I did. Because now I can distinguish when I'm drinking with a meal at night or something like that. Whereas
responsibly.
Yes. When I would drink before, it would be to escape. So that's why I was able to come to that. But I know that doing drugs would make me go back into that cave and spot again. And then I wouldn't be able to come out of it. And that I know. And because I know that, I don't do drugs. Yeah.
That's a lot of insight, man. That's huge.
It took a lot of trial and error there, but
well, that's what life's about, trial and error.
Yeah.
I'm still, I am not sober,
Mm-hmm.
but I still know that I have there's certain parts of my personality that are affected by substances. And right. I will say this, I fully believe that cannabis should be legal for everybody that's over the age of whatever. However, I also know that it comes with not everybody can handle it.
Right.
And it becomes a crutch, and it there's a certain balance of, substance versus non-substance and stuff. But
100%.
I just had to ask, because some people really have to just stay away and not go there again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. I was going to say, do you want to take on a little more facts and myths, or would you like to move on to, whichever where you want to go?
If you want to, why don't we do one more fact versus myth, and then we'll then we'll go into our 3 questions.
Okay, great. Okay, this is a good one. Suicide occurs more during the holidays. Fact or myth?
I'll let Timmy take this one. We actually did an episode about this.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, great. Put me on the spot. I don't remember the episode. Off the top of my head, I'm gonna say, yeah, it probably does. Fact.
Okay.
All right. I actually was under the guise. I always thought that it did. And then as I got down the rabbit hole and did some research, I realized that that's just some fabrication that the media and people have passed around each other, you know, like a really bad joint. It's just like, it's just not, it is. I thought it was a good metaphor considering we're talking about sobriety.
Yeah.
I honestly thought that it did. And then when we did the episode at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, I thought that suicide did raise up during that time, but actually they say it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more of a
myth.
It's a myth. So it's more of a correlation thing than a causation thing.
Yes. So it definitely is a myth. And
Damn.
I want to share that most people think suicide is a selfish act, but most people who want to end their life think they are a burden to the loved ones. So they will try to stay around during the holidays so that they could leave their loved ones with a memory, or I had Christmas with them, I had this and that. And, I wanted to put that fact and myth in there because I wanted to touch on suicide being a selfish act. Now, a lot of people have the misconception of that because even in our language with others, and when some people have shared about suicide, sometimes the responses are, do you know how selfish that is? What do you think your mom would think? What about your family? What about your loved ones, right? And I could see in Tim's face, guys, Tim's shaking his head because
I hate it.
Oh
I
my
hate it.
God,
I hate it.
yeah.
I hate it.
Because
I hate that so much. I hate it.
It's such a trigger, right? Because it's one of those things where if you really dove down deep into it, the people who want to take their lives, I'll say mostly, are ones that they are feeling as a burden to themselves and others.
Exactly.
Not that it is, well, I want to selfishly take my life. It is, they will try to hold out as long as they could for others until they succumb to whatever they choose, right? But it is not a selfish act. It really isn't. And if you look at it, it's truly, I remember somebody had told me when I shared about my father, they had asked me if I ever thought my father was brave. And I was like, yeah, my father was brave growing up, but whatever. And he didn't really share about his feelings though. And he came back and said, but do you think he's brave for what he did? And I had to really sit there, like, brave about taking his life? He was like, yeah, brave about taking his life. And I thought, holy crap, like that was probably one of the hardest things to do. The hardest thing to do. I mean, we are hardwired. If we have a cut on our finger, we hold our finger where that cut is because we don't want that pain. We don't want it to hurt. And to actively hurt oneself till completion, that's what he asked, do you think your father was brave about? And I right there broke down to tears because how many of us can actually do such a thing? And I mean, that isn't to glorify suicide. It's to say, did you ever think about it in a different light where your father took his own life to the extreme of his bravery to do so? So I looked at it completely differently as well, right? Because it was like, that's not a selfish act. 100% it isn't, right? So that's why I wanted to touch on that for the fact and myth part of it, because
no, thank you for that, because that's huge, and I I fully agree with it, but it's so huge. Like you said, I feel like it almost, puts more burden on it. It creates more stigma saying that,
100%, 100%. And it's that classic, are you living for you or are you living for others in that way? Your life. I mean, we live our lives, all three of us, in the service of many others, but are we living for us? Are we living for our spouse? Are we living for our children? We're not. I think that's what's harder, because it kind of slaps somebody in the face about it. About
and
that way of thinking. And
I think slapping somebody in the face makes them think a little bit more.
We love face slapping here at the Above Ground Podcast.
And that has come up a few times in conversations that I've had about bravery. And I know that in certain cultures, there are certain cultures that do look at that as a brave act in certain ways.
Yes.
Not that that's not what we're going to talk about, but I just know that it really does depend culturally where you come from and what you've been indoctrinated with and what what you've learned and what you believe about it.
Yeah. 100%.
Wow. That's
exactly.
heavy, man. That's heavy. That's heavy. So Jamie, we appreciate so much you being here this morning. It's been awesome talking to you.
Oh, I'm enjoying it. It's great.
I'd love to have you back at some point.
I would love it. I would love to.
But for this one, we finish up every episode with 3 questions.
Yeah.
And one of them is not so serious, but some people take it very seriously. And then the other 2 are more serious, but I'll let Tim ask the first one.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite or least favorite word?
Okay. I'm going to speak on it's gonna teeter on both. Okay.
Yeah. Whatever you got.
So I'm going to bring it back to suicide, and I want to share with all of you that are listening, and with Will and Tim and myself. You'll notice in this interview or this podcast, this conversation, that all of us used correctly died by suicide, or you could even use suicided, right?
Yep.
And I am for that language, and that is the language I push forth, because I detest committed suicide. That makes your brain think of committed as an act of it being illegal, being wrong. There are people who commit murder, and there's a correlation with that. And in changing, or I shouldn't even say change, transforming the language to died by suicide, suicided, take one's life, like those are things in those wordings allow one to be more open to communication and having one understand that it is not a illegal crime act and a negative act in that aspect.
Well said. Well said.
We want to make sure that that's set out there, right? Because of our
absolutely
how we speak, right? And
yes.
we want to impress upon others to speak of the same language. So yeah, there's your answer.
And it's amazing. It's amazing how many people still use that. I mean, I must have heard it. I don't know how many times I've heard it in the media and stuff and everything. And I never thought about it until I started to do my volunteer stuff and become part of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I didn't realize that the language, and then it really made me think about language entirely. 100%. And it's amazing, like what language does. Peacemaker versus peacekeeper. Like there's a different connotation in that. And it's just like, you don't realize it. And then like Marshall Rosenberg, I think, the nonviolent communication is like huge, was a huge influence on me starting to think about the way I spoke about certain things. because you can really be like, words really do carry a lot of weight.
100%.
And what about a favorite word?
No, the favorite word is the language of
Right.
Okay.
died by suicide or suicided. I want to say favor that in that way because I'm happy that that's the form of communication, right? I think that that's so great, and creating that awareness and being able to share it in this light, and then correcting others as you hear it, right? Or acknowledging, thank you for saying it that way, right? That's why it's a favorite.
Awesome. So I have to ask, this is my question. Tim seems to get the serious questions, but me, I'm a joker. And this is not a joke though, because this is honest, because most people, really, cat, dog, or other.
Okay. So definitely dog.
Okay.
And I will share with you that I had a dog. He was a little Maltese, and amazing companion, great. And I wanted to share with you, since Will, I know that you're a music lover. Well, you both are.
We both are, yeah.
But I know that that's something I know that Will, because you asked this question. I named him Prince Rose.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I'll tell you why. One, for Prince, obviously.
Yeah.
And two, for Guns N' Roses. So
I love it.
Rose.
That's awesome.
And, I'm a huge music fan and as well. And what better yet to name my dog than after a great band and a great musician, right? Of course.
Absolutely. I love the fact that you combined Prince and Guns N' Roses, though, because there's people that really love Prince that would be like, Guns N' Roses, what?
It's true. Like when I would walk my dog and people would ask me what's his name, and they would say, why would you even? I was like, hey, like I love all kinds of music. I think that was the best mashup to do, right?
It's good. It's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So the last question is, if there was something that you could do or you would like to see done for mental health as a whole without any kind of restraint, what would it be?
I like that question, especially when you say not kind of, there's no restraint.
Yeah.
Yeah, no resource restraint whatsoever. What would you do?
Yeah. It would be having education available on topics like mental illness, suicide awareness, abuse, all of those things that people come through traumatic experiences for, educated in our schooling systems.
Yes.
Where that's available as young as, 4 or 5, where kids are taught what suicide is, the word suicide, what abuse is, what abuse means, because then they are able to distinguish it, acknowledge it, share about it, communicate about it, and then therefore have a lot of preventative measures when it comes to if they are faced with such a situation. So that would be the ultimate thing.
Yes.
You're speaking Tim's language. Jamie,
awesome.
Thank you so much for being here. It's been awesome talking to you, and it's a pleasure meeting you. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, you're so welcome.
And thank you.
Great time.
Well, we're going to wrap this one up this week. I think talking with Jamie, she really got to the heart of the matter on some of these things. So on that note, we hope you guys all enjoyed this. And if you all did like it, you can always, if you're listening on Apple, you can subscribe, leave us a review. You can find us on Spotify, at Above Ground Podcast on Instagram.
Yeah, all our Google friends. I shared the link to the Google podcast the other day on the Facebook page. Also, please leave a review, script, and share with your friends. And if you're so inclined, shoot us a line just to say that you're listening. So until next week, be well.
Be safe.
Saturday, June 5th, it's Reverbicon 2021, noon to 7 p.m. Fun for the whole family. All ages are welcome. Check out this awesome outdoor and indoor event. It's all sponsored by Collar City Concrete, Cool River Pools, LLC, Corpse FX, Special Effects Makeup, Collar City Painting, LLC. Into the great outdoors with some live music from Joe Mansman and the Midnight Revival Band, the Peter Anello Trio, and Vumbino. Wrestlers, artists, vendors, food, drinks, summer fun, Reverbicon 2021. Broken Road Barbecue, 1544 State Route 40, Schaghticoke, New York. Saturday, June 5th, noon to 7 p.m. with an after party with Brian Kane. Come hang out with Capital Underground on Nippertown and that buzzing 518 show. You've waited, now it's here, and it's free to the public. Reverbicon 2021, Saturday, June 5th at Broken Road Barbecue and Bar, Schaghticoke. Check in with the AboveGroundPodcast.net. For more information, go to Reverbicon on Facebook.